I often tell people follow what you're curious about because you don't know where that's going to lead. After the film came out, it basically OU became the #1 meteorology school in the nation. It wasn't that before the film, and it still is to this day. And there's been so much money and contributions that have gone into weather research, and they've been able to build a new facility after the film came out. So the fact of like getting it right was really important, and I think it actually had long-term effects after the film released.
Was there anything specific? I'm not sure if you were in this meeting or multiple meetings, but like a lot of the movies you love, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Goonies, they kind of go back to Spielberg. Was there anything Spielberg wanted to see in this new iteration that comes to mind?
For if Steven loves tornadoes, he's like seen every video that's been posted probably on YouTube that's out there. So it was really important to him, for him also to get the science right and to, get our characters right. And I felt that he gave us really meaningful notes throughout that have helped our film. So it's been really wonderful having him as an executive producer on the project.
How do you kind of go about, so a lot of screenwriters are going to listen to this episode. How do you go about like giving notes? Is it more about you're looking for issues that need work, or there are certain passes you do when reading a screenplay?
Yeah, when I read it, I really try and be mindful because of the work. I know how much work goes into it, but I can go in. When I read a script, for me, it's I kind of break it down into what are my character notes, what are my big set piece notes, what are my theme notes. So I try and look at and break it down in a really and more in a way too of have you thought about it like this? Is it can we take a look at this scene and think about this approach and really keep it as a conversation. I think it's more productive when it comes that way. And sometimes clarity happens for me on my end, or it'll happen for the writer when we're talking about it. So that's generally my approach when I am giving notes, is to keep it conversational and question based to see if they'd be willing to relook at certain pieces. And also, like, I know there are some scripts that I know the direction the studio wants to go in. And so it's helping the writer see those things. And so we can get the script to a green light. So oftentimes it's just a collaboration between the different parties. If it has a studio already attached, they're a part of the notes process. And if it's just myself and the writer, then we're us working together to get it in a place that we feel is good enough to get it to the studio or to attach talent to it.
This is a big blockbuster film. You worked in many positions over the years. Are there different, I mean, obviously there are some that are going to be obvious, but what are some of the different notes in like maybe notes for a smaller independent film versus a blockbuster film? Do you kind of go about it the same way, or are they completely different?
No, I think you go about it the same way because at the end of the day, you're making the film very similarly, so whether if it's a small scale or big scale, it seems when you have a larger scale film, you still run into some of the same issues you do on a smaller budget because you have to stay in budget. And so my approach to notes don't differ by budget. It's just by product
Tell
and
me
material.
a little about, so you mentioned like this project comes across your desk. You in this case there was a writer attached, but also like the opposite happens. Sometimes a project comes up, you maybe need to go find a writer. Do you just have like a giant like, modern Rolodex of things, or like how do you go about kind of organizing this? And I'm sure you're just reading a lot of scripts, but tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I would say have an ongoing grid, we call it, or list of like writers and filmmakers and directors that I really respond to or like their work. So if I've, read different samples, I'll make a note and kind of jot down kind of what specific, what kind of, whether it's genre based or if they want to do more comedy, I kind of make all these notes for myself. Or if I'm watching a film, I watch everything. And so I definitely take notes and write, okay, I really love the dialogue in this script. Who wrote it? Let me write it down.
Two cells to the west are fighting over the same inflow. They'll choke each other out. This one to the east is the sky all to herself. Moisture, wind shear, instability. All the things you need to give Ben a good show.
I often tell people follow what you're curious about because you don't know where that's going to lead. And I knew, that as I kept growing and learning and seeing what they did and also seeing what we worked on in television. And I just said, how can I learn more? So I just was reading everything I could while I was there, and then offered some thoughts and notes. And, through time, my role progressed into what I, ended up doing before I went on to produce Twisters.
And so for those unfamiliar, Frank Marshall's the EP on like 160 credits. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Gremlins, Goonies, Benjamin Button, Signs. He's got 7 movies, I think, in the works right now. What was that first like? Were you overwhelmed? Like, were you taking notes? I mean, it's very like trial by fire, I would imagine. But how did you kind of start to like put the pieces together?
For me, well, when I was ready, I got to a point where I was kind of a little bit getting exhausted from like the freelance, and wanted some stability. So when it was really a big eye opener, because I hadn't had a 9 to 5, like, or 9 to 6 or 7 or 8, however long we go these days, when I joined the company. And so that was an adjustment. But for me, I felt like as a producer, you're a problem solver, you're a fixer, you're looking at different, both creatively and in physical production, right? So when I did my job at Kennedy Marshall, I'm like, how do I make this, the day more efficient for everybody? How can I, if I'm going to go fix the Xerox machine, I'm going to be the best at doing that. Or if I have to get a cup of coffee, it's going to be, the hot and great and wonderful. And I think some of the mundane tasks of working at an office, you have to look at it under another lens to help kind of condition yourself. And so that really helps me with, when you're rolling calls. And also, I want to say, you have to, listening. I'm surrounded by all these people who are making and doing the things that I wanted to do.
Did any of the, so I'm not sure how far you maybe got into journalism, or it was just something you kind of did in college and told your parents. Did any of that stuff that you were researching translate? Because you did later work on a few documentaries.
Yes, I think it did. I feel like with docs, you're always kind of looking for, what makes this story unique? How does this connect to other people? Why are people going to tune in? And a lot of times with journalism, you're doing the same thing. How are we going to get this story that's so important to a broader audience? How are they going to connect to it? What's our way into telling it? So I definitely think there was overlap with what I studied at school, and then later on in working in documentaries.
Do you see a balance? Like, I'm thinking back to what you told your parents. Like, for whatever reason, it seems safer, not just journalism, but like to do nonfiction as opposed to fiction. Like, do the companies you work for now, do they purposely, if you look at all the assets they're working on, kind of balance, some nonfiction documentaries with some fictional blockbusters, possibly?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Frank, I know for him, he really loved getting into the doc space. So, he was excited about directing in that space. I think there's a different hands-on environment when you're working on documentaries. But so I think I think it's sometimes things that we tell ourselves, like, oh, if, going back to your question with parents and everything else, and saying, okay, I'm going to take this more quote unquote traditional job approach. I don't really think there is, if whether it be documentaries or scripted. I think it's all kind of you're using some of these same skills, and it takes time, and docs are so hard too. It's hard to get, you're working on getting financing, your subjects, your archival, lots of licensing. So there's so much that goes into making a documentary. So I wouldn't say that one is safer than the other. I think this is something maybe sometimes we tell ourselves.
Are there any, and you can kind of choose one or jump around. So you're listed as like production coordinator, assistant to Frank Marshall, personal assistant manager, head of production. Are there certain like lessons or stories that you kind of remember as you were being promoted, like through the ranks, where you like, I really feel good about this, and now I feel like maybe, taking a chance or trying to get promoted, anything like that that comes to mind?
I love what I do for work. I love being a creative producer. I love working with talent and directors, but it led me to Lee Isaac Chung. And Isaac is really such a special filmmaker. And when you talk about someone who sees things the way you do, I really find that with him. And I think what drew me to him when we were looking to put a director on this project was having a sense of that. And now working with him and seeing this project all the way through, it's so nice to work with people that see the story the way you do, want it to end the way you do, treat people the way that you like to treat people. And, there's such a level of respect there. So, if I had taken another opportunity, I wouldn't have been where I am now.
And obviously, you're in a position to have lots of meetings to reach out to people, but like even that, even with a project to bring to him, how do you kind of start that conversation? I imagine some compliments and you talk about his past work, but what are some of the things you said to kind of see if he's a fit for the job?
Yeah, for me, it's, we'll have a script and we'll look at it and say, okay, this is a really great script. Who can bring, maybe we needed a writer director to kind of do a past and breathe, like, maybe we wanted to, sometimes you need a little bit extra character development, or you don't know, each script is different, right? But for this one, I'm like, I really want this to feel authentic to the place that we're telling the story about. Well, Isaac's from Arkansas. He, if you've watched Minari, there are scenes where they discuss the tornado incident with his family, and there's so much heart in it. And I said, okay, well, I want someone to infuse the script with, this sense of home and this sense of belonging to a place. Because I'm from the coast. I don't know what it's like to live in the Midwest. I have family in the Midwest. But there is something different when you are from the area that you're talking about and sharing these stories about. So that was really important for me. He also had just recently worked with some of my colleagues over at Lucasfilm, and their experience was so great. And I know that those episodes, The Mandalorian and now Skeleton Crew that'll be coming out, are really big, VFX and expensive. And so I'm like, okay, he did great with those episodics. This would be a really good opportunity with this film if he's paired with the right, surrounded by the right team and people to help him see his vision through. And so these are the things I think about once we start talking and, hearing, kind of ask him questions like, how do you see this? How do you want to film this? What do you feel like is maybe missing from the script? What would you want to add? So these are some of the questions I think about when when I'm in the process of pairing, a filmmaker or a director with the script.